The story of Christmas and the story of Jesus' birth into this world hides a dark story of loss and tragedy, of tears and pain. Matthew 2:16 is traditionally referred to as the Massacre of innocent children. There we are told about the murder of all boys aged 2 and under in the Bethlehem region. This event is extremely disturbing, but it is also part of the historical record of Christ's birth or not. Has this really happened in history? Or was this massacre of innocent children a story made up by the first Christians? And if this event is historically real, if such a public massacre did indeed take place, why are there no other historical records to confirm this event? To find out if the answer to the above question is true or fictional, keep watching our video today. Before that, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any Bible-related content. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Spirit, I pray that you receive many blessings from God. Amen. Let's get started. The slaughter of innocent children is a story in the New Testament. All 14,000 boys under the age of 2 were ordered to be slaughtered by Herod the Great, a vassal king of the Roman Empire, who ruled the Jews from 74 BC or 73 BC until 4 BC. According to the prophecies of Eastern astrologers, a baby has just been born. That child is Jesus Christ. The prophet also said that the child would also be the king of the Jews in the future. This also meant that Herod's throne as emperor would be terminated. Because it is impossible to identify which of the thousands of babies in Bethlehem and surrounding areas has just been born, Herod the Great, in order to protect his throne or that of his son, ordered his soldiers to kill all boys, 2 years of age and under, in the aforementioned places. He hoped that among the 14,000 children killed, Jesus Christ would be among them. This is the largest massacre of innocent children in human history. 14,000 innocent children were later canonized by the Roman Holy See. These innocent children were the youngest, most numerous, most speechless first saints, and were exempt from the usual rites of baptism. And the commemoration of these first martyrdom saints is held annually on December 28th. Now, let's start turning the pages of this tragic event, with the first question: who was Herod the Great? If you've ever been asked which character from the ancient world we have more primary evidence from sources than anyone else in the world, the answer is not Jesus or St. Paul or Caesar Augustus or Julius Caesar or Alexander the Great. No, it was Herod the Great, believe it or not. Why? Because Josephus provides us with 2 complete books on the life of Herod the Great, and it's the main material more than anyone else. He was a remarkably successful politician in keeping peace between Rome, which had conquered Judea since 63 BC, and he acted as a Roman governor abroad. He was only known as a customer king, which meant that very often when the Romans conquered a province, they didn't want to send a governor out. There was a local king who was doing his job well, and so yes, he could be called king, but he certainly respected Rome and his entire administration. He has been in power since 40 BC when he was crowned king. He did not really take control of the land until, with the help of Rome, he drove some of his enemies out of Jerusalem, and indeed from about 37 BC onwards he was in power until his death in 4 BC. He was remarkably successful in many ways. He deserves the title of Herod the Great if we talk about his achievements throughout his life. Of course, he was the one who rebuilt the great temple in Jerusalem. He was the one who single-handedly created the city of Caesarea. Where there was no good harbor in the Holy Land, he created one by sinking several hulls and then using them as a base to build a breakwater on a straight coast. He built Caesarea in 12 years, and he built other cities as well. In Jerusalem, he renovated the entire city. In addition to building a beautiful palace of his own, he also had a racetrack, a stadium, and theaters, etc. He was a Greek-style king, and he also built 7 great fortresses throughout the country, strengths with which he was able to defend his government. One of them, of course, is the most famous fortress, which is Masada along the southwest corner of the Dead Sea. Everything he touched diplomatically seemed to turn into gold. He kept peace with both Jerusalem and Rome, and in that sense he was very successful. Yes, he was politically successful, but Herod had another side. Herod's paranoid explanation began to appear later in his life. Basically, he is responsible for many problems in his home country. His house was a mess only because he married 10 wives, and each of them gave birth to a prince for him, and every male prince plotted to succeed to the #1 throne, and there could only be one person who was #1. And so if there aren't 2 or 3 subplots going on before they drink orange juice in the morning, you know something is wrong. Josephus only tells us a horrific story of what is going on in the family with attempts at poisoning, one brother against another. That horrified Herod so much that he actually killed his 3 sons on suspicion of treason. He killed his favorite wife out of 10 of them. Mariam was his favorite person. She was a Maccabean Hasmonean princess, and he killed her. And then he killed his mother-in-law, I should say, one of his many mothers-in-law. He invited the high priest down to Jericho for a swim. They played a very rough water polo game, and they drowned him. He killed several uncles and a few cousins. Some have ironically said that he is a true family man. In fact, it was Augustus himself, whom Herod had always held in great respect, who said, "I would rather be Herod's pig than his son." This is a double pun. In Greek, it's choiros and huios, a clever pun on words. And the other idea is that at least pigs aren't killed to make food for humans there, they have a chance to live longer. And so this is a great pun. Oh, that's right, Herod's thirst for blood. At one point in his life, Herod plotted to kill a stadium full of Jewish leaders. The plot failed, but what did it reveal about him? Yes, Josephus had a very terrible thing to report about Herod in the last months of his life. He is paranoid about himself, even though he has grasped some reality. For example, he worried that no one would mourn his own death. Of course, that shows how accurate he is. They are preparing a joint celebration, and no one wants to die knowing that they will dance on your grave. And so he's going to give people something to cry about. In 4 BC, he was in his winter palace in Jericho. It's the only place in the Holy Land that doesn't have snow or cold in winter. It is 1,200 feet below sea level. And Herod was dying. He tried every remedy in the world to stop the gang of diseases that were invading him. He went to the hot springs in the northeast corner of the Dead Sea, Kaliro, which still spewed hot water 2,000 years later, and that didn't cure him. So he went back to his winter palace, and he invited his sister Salome over, and he said, "I want you to arrest all the Jewish leaders in this land and imprison them in the racetrack, right below this palace." And so she did what he asked. And then she said, "Brother, why are you doing this?" And Herod said, "Well, I know that when I die, the Jews will rejoice. So I wanted to give them something to cry about." And so he wanted all these leaders to be executed in that racetrack, so that there would be thousands of mourning households by the time Herod the Great died. Now let's get to the heart of the matter, whether the murder of 14,000 innocent children for the purpose of finding Jesus of Herod is true or fictional. The Gospel of St. Matthew tells the story of the massacre of innocent children. King Herod ordered the murder of all boys under the age of 2 born in Bethlehem, as the wise men had told him that a child destined to become king of the Jews had been born in the city. Jesus was saved from the massacre when his family fled to Egypt. Nicholas Poussin describes this dramatic scene in the New Testament. The soldier on the left tramples a terrified mother who can no longer protect her child. In the middle, another person tries to flee. On the right, the third person tried to hold the executioner tightly. The fourth person knelt down, mourning his dead child. Begging, horrified, terrified, desperate. Each woman's face expresses a different emotion. The dark architecture that closes the background of the painting does not leave an escape for the figures arranged in a relief style such as ancient reliefs. The faces of the soldiers, the nameless, indifferent executioners, were in darkness. Their bodies formed curves, like a creepy dance around the victims. In this context, the biblical story of the massacre of innocent children is recounted, describing Herod's backlash to the news of the birth of a potential rival king. The Greek liturgy claims to have 14,000 heroic saints, while the list of the first Syrian saints claims 64,000. Coptic sources claim there are 144,000 and the event took place on December 29th. The Catholic Encyclopedia of 1907 to 1912, acknowledging that Bethlehem was too small a town to provide such figures, reduced the number of victims to about 6 to 20 children in the town, with about a dozen children in the surrounding areas. However, there is no historical evidence to support the claim that the massacre of innocent children occurred. The story is found only in the Gospel of Matthew, and there are no independent corroborating accounts from other historical sources. It is more likely that the story of the massacre of innocent children is a rhetorical measure that Matthew uses to emphasize the importance of Jesus' birth. By portraying Herod as a ruthless tyrant who kills innocent children, Matthew creates a stark contrast between Jesus, the innocent child destined to save the world, and Herod, the evil king who suffers destruction. Some people are dissatisfied with the story. According to the New Testament, the first question is, why is God an almighty and allows the killing of children to happen in such a horrible way? As an almighty, God would have many ways to rescue the child and the 14,000 innocent children. But why would God be indifferent? Even if he was an ordinary person, he could still come up with many ways, let alone an almighty God. For example, if God could turn the waters, open the way under the sea at the call of Moses, to save the Jews fleeing the Egyptian massacre in the Sinai Peninsula, why didn't God turn into a thunderbolt to kill King Herod to save the child and 14,001 innocent children? Why did God rescue only one child, God's child, but ignore 14,000 other children? Does God bring love to mankind by turning his face away so that children can be free to be blood-pricked? Were these tiny martyrs strangled to pluck blood without being able to utter a single word of resistance, or plea being strangled to be labeled holy martyr without being able to say a word of acceptance or a word of rejection? So, where is the value of the martyr? Are these never baptized children, as defined by the Holy See, really innocent children? Why didn't God tell Herod in the dream and warn Herod that if Herod touched any of the children, Herod would be shattered by lightning? Why didn't God only teach the Eastern astrologers in his dreams that he shouldn't have come to Herod to ask such a question? Why didn't God dream to Herod's soldiers that they were not to kill children and told them to escape Herod to go somewhere else? Since God arranged in advance what would happen, why did God arrange for Herod to become king, so that Herod would have the opportunity to kill people in such a barbaric way? Why didn't God turn into a hurricane that blocked Herod's army on its way to Bethlehem, just as God had done to save the Jews who were being pursued by the Egyptians, before the Jews reached the Sinai Peninsula? And there are many more similar questions. If reason rather than faith is used to judge and ask questions, one will be able to enlighten many people. Although Herod bore the title of King of Judea, like most other kings who served the Roman Empire, he also knew that he had to serve the interests of the Roman Empire. Shortly after taking control of Judea, Herod presented his value as King of Judea to the new emperor, Augustus. After showing his support against Mark Antony, Herod was able to win the support of Augustus and continued to rule the Jewish people. Despite regaining Judea, Herod remained a servant of the Roman Empire. This was shown by the limitations in his dealings with other kingdoms, as well as his support for Rome and Judea. Roman support for Herod played an important role that allowed him to maintain power in Judea. There has been an explanation regarding Herod's role in Rome during the Jewish wars. Josephus remarked that Herod's rule was often on favorable terms, and suggested that Herod benefited from the famous events that took place throughout his reign. Josephus emphasized, although he was a dictatorial king, Herod had many scholars who came to him to cooperate. Herod's tyrannical power was demonstrated by many security measures, mistakenly suppressing the contempt of the people, especially the Jews. For example, Herod proposed using the secret police to monitor and report public sentiment towards him. To deter those who expressed contempt for him, he sought to ban protests, and in some extreme cases he resorted to force. Herod had a body of more than 2,000 people. Josephus describes the various units that personally protected Herod, who also attended Herod's funeral, including the Dorifneroi and a Thracian army, often consisting of special veterans and young men from Jewish families. The Thracian army had served in the Jewish army since the Hasmonean dynasty, while the Celtic army, Cleopatra's former bodyguards, was considered a gift from Augustus to Herod after the Battle of Actium. The German team, a quarrelsome Augustus team, was responsible for protecting the palace. Herod spent lavish sums of money on construction projects and generous gifts to kingdoms, including Rome. The buildings Herod built were very large and very extravagant projects. Herod built the Temple Mount, part of which still exists today is the Western Wall. In addition, Herod also built ports at Caesarea. In his zeal to reform Judea, he went beyond his altruistic heart. All these major projects were aimed at gaining Jewish support and helping his reputation as a good leader. However, to finance these expenses, Herod used a Hasmonean tax system that weighed heavily on the people of Judea. Despite the burden of paying for Herod's lavish construction projects and gifts, These projects may have helped offset the burdens in which Herod provided more opportunities for people to better serve themselves and their families. In some cases, Herod provided for the people when needed, such as during a severe famine in 25 BC. With regard to religious policy, Herod experienced a mixed reaction from the Jewish population. Although Herod considered himself the king of the Jews, he also told the people that he also represented the Gentiles living in Judea. Pagan temples were built by him outside the Jewish quarters, confirming his words. Many Jews have questioned whether he was really a Jew in the Idumean tradition. Although his faith was problematic, Herod often sought to respect Jewish traditions in public life. Some notable examples are the insertion of coins without a human image, which was used in the Jewish quarter. An important example of this has been illustrated by his acknowledgement of the sacredness of the Second Temple expressed by the use of monks in the construction. Although some of Herod's efforts were consistent with traditional Jewish law, there were many cases where Herod was insensitive to these laws, especially the issue of Jewish antiquities, one of the major complaints from the Jews to Herod. In Jerusalem, he introduced foreign forms of entertainment, and there was a golden eagle erected at the entrance to the temple, indicating that he did not really represent the faith of the Jewish people. The taxes Herod introduced also gave him a bad reputation. Because of his constant concern, Herod always gave expensive gifts, and in the end, the amount of money spent was too great. Herod's method of leadership annoyed the Jews because they were forced to pay for his extravagance. The two largest Jewish sects in the court, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, also show opposition to Herod. The Pharisees were angry with Herod because he ignored so many of their demands for the construction of the temple. At the same time, Sadducees, who was known for his responsibility to the monks in the temple, opposed Herod because he had replaced the high priests with monks from Babylon and Alexandria in an attempt to gain Jewish support. At the end of Herod's reign, anger and discontent became common among the Jews. Riots erupted after Herod's death. In many cities, including Jerusalem, all Jewish complaints demanded action against Herod, such as heavy taxes and violations of the rules. Because of Herod's treatment that the Jews had to receive, they were ready to break Roman law. Herod's leaders erupted in anger, which became one of the causes of the Great Revolt of 70 CE between the Jews and the Romans. That's all that is rephrased about Herod the Great. No other historical source accounts of the massacre of 14,000 boys under the age of 14 at Herod the Great at Bethlehem are recorded in the Roman Jewish historian Titus Flavius Josephus's work, the 1st century CE Roman Jewish. The archaeologists in a collection, written in the December 2008 issue of National Geographic, based on the results of excavations at Herod's final burial site, 5.5 kilometers southeast of Bethlehem. In the article, the author boldly stated, Herod is best known for the massacre of male infants in Bethlehem in an attempt to kill Jesus. The truth is that Herod is almost completely innocent. Michael Grant, a well-known writer on the historical topics of the massacre of innocent children, wrote, "The story is not a story about history, but a legend or a folk legend. Herod the Wicked is a reflective figure of many vicious legends. One of the propaganda cases of cruelty was the slaughter of innocent children. Even though the massacre did not happen. The slaughter of innocent children is an invented story, although the invention relies on a different aspect of actual historical facts. Herod feared that a child born in Bethlehem would be king of the Jewish people. Also a legend to fit Jeremiah's prophecy, and also to reflect the domination of Herod, which arose from many barbaric acts in the last years before his death." Daniel J. Harrington, a professor of New Testament and chair of the Biblical Studies Department at Boston College School of Theology and Ministry, formerly Weston Jesuit School of Theology, said the historic event of the massacre of innocent children was an expansive event for which no definitive answer can be found. Paul Meyer, professor of history and Christian fiction, also confirmed that most books written about Herod deny that the massacre did not take place. Among the historians who doubt the history of the massacre are Geza Vermes and E.P. Sanders, who consider the stories to be part of the biographies of the saints of creation. They argue that the story may have originated in Herod's murder of his children, an act that was deeply impressive at the time and recorded by Josephus. Others argue for the silence of historians, including Josephus, who no doubt recorded several examples of Herod acting in such a way to defend his power, and the view that the story was a device to admit fault or carry out prophetic construction. David Hill acknowledged that the story contains an unlikely historical event, but added that Matthew's real concern is theological reflection on the theme of the implementation of the Old Testament. Stephen Harris and Raymond Brown argue that Matthew's purpose was to present Jesus as a Messiah, and the massacre of innocent children as the fulfillment of passages in Hosea, the Exodus from Egypt, Exodus, and Jeremiah referring to the exile to Babylon. Brown also shows that the story is Exodus' archetype of Moses' birth. Meyer argues that skeptics tend to take opinion as a matter of fact, and they have largely avoided careful historical searches. After analyzing the arguments against the infant massacre, Meyer concluded that they were all seriously flawed. However, in the end, archaeologists have not been able to provide concrete evidence within the archaeological scope. The ostrich, no matter how long it puts its head in a pile of sand to escape the coming storm, there is no way it can avoid the storm. Just like man, no matter how much man deliberately avoids the truth, he cannot help but face the truth. The truth is always the truth. The only way is to dare to look directly at the truth, even if it is a harsh truth. Only by daring to look directly at the truth can people have a chance to escape from their own prison of ignorance. What is the prison of ignorance? The prison of ignorance is blind belief. From the Middle Ages onwards, humans did not love their children as much as they do today. One can abandon a newborn child and let it die if the parents do not want to raise it. It is possible to kill the child to get the blood of the sacrificial God. And God can completely destroy the women and children of a nation. The Old Testament speaks these truths, and as long as people dare to look directly at the truth. The truth is that the surface of the earth before the birth of Jesus Christ is full of myths, especially the myth of children being killed for sacrificial blood, full of stories about gods and full of satanic stories. Remember, Matthew and Luke do not copy each other when it comes to the nativity. And that's good, because in this way they can approach it from different angles. And let us recall that the first Christian martyr was not Stephen, it is Jesus. But even Jesus, in my opinion, the first martyr in the Christian church, was not the first child sought to kill in Bethlehem, and we always ignore that. And if you've really watched this far, with God's blessing, share it with your loved ones so they can know about this as well. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell to give us more motivation to create more videos about the Bible. We hope to see you again in the next video. May God bless you and protect you at all times. Amen.